Now, let me just say in closing, well, not in closing, but as I wind down, because I'm not quite ready to close, that um, that there's a critique of Hope Six. And as we wrote this book, which Brookings asked me to do, to chronicle the program, and let me just say, uh, from time to time over the years, I'm reading an article on some other subject like Bill Clinton's legacy or something like that, and the author will write a line that just lifts my heart. A line that says something like, one of the untold stories of the Clinton administration, but one that has transformed not just public housing sites, but entire cities, is this program called Hope Six. The other day, I was reading a piece in the New York Times on a Sunday about crime in the United States, and it talked about the unusual decline in the statistics in crime. Now, it's not true in every single place, and there are waves and spikes, and there are egregious incidents that get everybody's attention, but on the whole, statistically, crime is down in the United States. And in the core of that piece, it suggested one of the reasons is the breakup of the old complexes, which fueled the drug lords, the gangs, the concentrated violence, etc. So without knowing what the long-term implications of this program would be some very important things happen. But there is a critique, and so when Brookings asked us to do the book, we sought out the critique. One of them, which you know well because it's actually been applied in Atlanta from time to time, is that when people are moved off of the sites, two things happen. Two things bad happen among the many good. One is that they don't get to come back. And there's a lot of mixed evidence on that around the country, whether people choose not to come back once they have a Section 8 voucher and they get settled somewhere. They say, well, I don't want to go back. I'm settled now in my life. My children are in school. I've got a job. I don't want to go back. So there's a lot of mixed evidence on the question, which I think we'll probably talk about tonight, on whether that aspect of the program, of the promise that we would bring most people back, or those that wanted to come back, actually have had a chance to come back across the country. Atlanta's done a good job on this, but some cities have not been as diligent. If I were still HUD secretary, if I'd been able to stay longer, one of the places where I would have put my foot down real hard is on the way that process occurred, because the promise always was that if people wanted to come back who were public housing residents, they'd be able to. And so that hasn't worked exactly as one would have envisioned. Now, the flip side of that problem is that people say when people left the concentrated sites and went out and used a Section 8 voucher, in many places, they just concentrated in another place. That was a concern in Baltimore, where the thought was people were going to the first ring of suburbs, and landlords were taking the easy way out, which is taking all Section 8, and the same problems, human problems, that existed in the big high-rises were now occurring in garden-style apartments in suburban places that were ill-prepared to deal with them. And nothing changed about the job opportunities or about the educational progress for those families. As I say, the evidence is, I think it's fair to say, mixed, but the propensity of the evidence suggests, and this is work done by the Urban Institute, that the majority of people have done better in their lives, whether they took Section 8 and went somewhere else, or whether they chose to come back. There's a woman named Mary Cunningham that's done the analysis, and most of it suggests that job prospects improve for people, that educational progress for children improved, and on the whole is positive. But there are many critics who still say too many people got lost in the process. We lost people in the process. There's also a critique that's the critique from the left. The critique from the right is that too much money was spent and that the price was too high for the payoff, that it was not a good cost-benefit equation, and that too much of the money really was allocated and not spent correctly. I think that's not as good an argument, because for the payoff that most cities have gotten from the transformations that occurred, lots of indirect benefits have occurred, and whole cities now are on a much, much stronger course. And I think it's one of the factors that is drawing people back into the cities and strengthening cities. So let me just close by saying that, and this time I will close, by saying that the new administration, the Obama administration, and the Congress, congressional leaders like Barney Frank, who heads the Key Committee, and Maxine Waters, who has housing responsibilities, are helping, working with the administration, the new HUD Secretary, Sean Donovan, and his team, to identify the best practices that came from Hope 6 and integrate them in thoughtful ways into choice neighborhoods. Some have strong ideas and insist on a concept called one-for-one replacement, which is a very difficult thing. One-for-one replacement means you have to replace every physical unit that had taken out with a physical unit. Now, that's doable if you are allowed to put some of them in other sites. But if the requirement is that one-for-one replacement needs to be on the same site, then we're defeating some of the purpose of trying to reduce density and trying to deal with the mix of incomes and so forth. So that's a bone of contention that needs to be worked out. There's also rules related to how public housing operates and how tenant management occurs, resident management issues occur that have to be worked out. But I think in the final analysis, it can be said that this effort that began in 1992 has improved prospects for many families, reshaped key urban neighborhoods, created magnets for investment and opportunity, and given a breath of life to cities with a positive momentum that have been able, instead of wringing their hands in despair about what to do about some intractable urban neighborhoods, have found ways to make progress that make it possible to create a mix of opportunities, a mix of incomes, and integration of people by economics, economic integration across our metropolitan areas. And so in the final analysis, Hope 6 is much more than some interesting architecture and designs and land use and urban planning concepts, but really moving people forward, creating opportunity in the best traditions of American social progress. Thank you very much for allowing me to come over and be part of tonight.
Henry, I wanted to thank you for your comments, and more importantly, I want to thank you for continuing to push Washington. You've been involved in these issues for a very long time, and in fact, we all need to remember that it was Henry Cisneros who traveled before he was secretary, traveled to Los Angeles following the riots and was working in the streets, literally sweeping up the broken glass at a time when American cities were really hurting. And you weren't traveling with a media crew, or you weren't seeking an office, but you did want to make a difference, and you did, in fact, make a difference. So thank you. Before I go on, I also want to recognize someone who worked with Henry in Washington. In fact, this person was responsible for implementing the day-to-day operations of the Hope 6 program while he was at HUD. I've known Kevin Marchman a lot longer than either one of us will care to admit to. He was the Deputy Assistant Secretary at HUD and then went on to become the Assistant Secretary under Andrew Cuomo. I actually met him when he was the Deputy Mayor in Denver. And Kevin, if you'll stand up for just a second. It is accurate to say that there's not a city in this country where these projects have happened that is not a direct result of the work of his day-to-day work. So thanks for what you did, Kevin.